Weather in our seemingly ever-extended winter, most of us have also heard that the Great Lakes were frozen to a nearly unprecedented extent. That is, except for 1994. Time magazine noted that the Great Lakes, which constitute the largest freshwater supply in the world, were nearly 88% frozen. It's been over 80% frozen only 5 times apparently since 1972. And in spite of this year, they are on to, and in spite of all this, we are still amidst a warming trend. Good news. Well, if you are a bird or any animal dependent on open water, wildlife have really had a tough time this year. Audrey Miller, who faithfully fills the feeder and provides water for the birds in her Innisfil backyard, knows this very well. I think she has most of the community of Simcoe County's birds down at her place. The news reported that hundreds, if not thousands, of birds, though along Lake Ontario, were not so fortunate, succumbing to the lack of water in the midst of plenty, if it were not for the cold temperatures. Water is important to us all, of course. In this part of the world, in spite of having such a huge supply of water from lakes surrounding us, water prices from the taps of most urban areas have increased quite substantially in recent years. I see some smiles out there. The modern world is beginning to understand that good, clean water is not to be taken for granted. 600 years before the birth of Christ, the Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu recognized the importance of water in life. He said, "In the world there is nothing more submissive and weak than water. Yet for attacking that which is hard and strong, and nothing can surpass it." The people of ancient biblical times also knew the value of a steady water supply too well. Like the birds for whom the commodity seems to disappear too easily, peoples of the Middle East have known the importance of water for millennia. The rivers and bodies of water in their midst were not taken for granted in this landscape otherwise dominated by desert. The Nile, the Jordan, and the Euphrates were all lifelines for the cultures that gathered along them. The last being, by some accounts, the location of the origin of human life on Earth, the so-called cradle of civilization. Individual settlements like Jerusalem came to have ancient underground conduits in efforts, presumably to guarantee future prosperity of their people. A process sustained by modern methods today, like most modern cities throughout the world. Apparently, amidst the rush to cities, of people from farms to cities, there are now over 30 cities in the world that are over 10 million in size. The richest populations, though, have always been nearest usable water. And so it is, and has been for much of the world, with the densest populations gathering near fresh water supply, though not always clean, as in the case of the Ganges River in India, the principal supply of water for nearly 1 billion people, or the Yangtze River in China, the Amazon in South America, the Mississippi right down through the middle of North America, or the Western European Danube. But while over 95% of our planet is covered in water, apparently only 2.5% of that is fresh water, and much of that is frozen, as we know. That leaves a remarkably smaller and very precious amount, which makes its way via groundwater into these streams and rivers upon which we all depend, and is hopefully drinkable by organisms like ourselves. Water, a key key to life. Without water, there is no life. In some ways, it's hardly surprising that it should be a key component of both sacraments, not one, but both sacraments of the Church. Baptismal water, as it is symbolically conceived as the beginning of a new life in faith, and the water from which communion wine is derived as containing within it key ingredients from the fruits of the earth, also dependent for their growth on the supply of water. A profound symbol not just of our coming together in our connectedness with the earth, but more importantly, in spirit, communing in the body and blood of Christ. No wonder it is called a celebration, when at the root of it is not just the meaning, but the possibility of life itself. As you heard in our lectionary readings this morning, water is a rather prominent theme there. In fact, it's prominent throughout the Bible. The thirsty Israelites, near death in the book of Exodus, fighting amongst themselves over water amidst the desert of sin, a real place, though it would by its title also seem perfectly analogous to the story of real life. And Moses struggles with what to do, and so he turns to God, who tells him to go and in the presence of his elders strike a rock, and water issues forth from that rock. And they name this very spot with a Hebrew name that reminds them of the question the people, in their great thirst, demanded of Moses. Is the Lord with us? Massa and Meribah, as the Hebrew words imply. In the world today, you would wonder if the people might ask, not, is the world with us, but does anybody care if the Lord is with us? And then we move into the water-centered New Testament reading from John chapter 4, of which I have reflected here a few times, of Jesus' encounter at the well with the Samaritan woman. I find this reading not just interesting, but particularly illuminating. Here is this woman who is living with a man who is not her husband, and has had 5 husbands before him, and Jesus merely informs her, before she even has an opportunity to confess it, that he is aware of her situation. What a perfect opportunity, you would think, to pontificate about her life arrangements. The tone of judgment is not there. In fact, it would almost seem that they were on the same truthful wavelength. Jesus knew her just as she was. Jesus doesn't merely moralize with her, and so she's inspired to go from there. She's lifted. She goes from there and she tells everyone about her encounter. The truth recognized above Jacob's well, where Jesus preaches not on the nature of marriage, as you might expect, or even you might prefer him to do that, but rather he's teaching about the living truth. Whoever drinks the water I give them, says Jesus, will never thirst. Indeed, the water I give them will become in them a spring of water welling up to eternal life. Water evidently is the most often mentioned natural resource in the Bible. Many of us can recall the familiar biblical phrases, or stories rather, from the earth being formed in Genesis, and reference to the face of the deep, the Spirit of God, to Noah's near drowning in it, to the calming still waters of it, whereby the Lord our shepherd bids us to walk, to Jesus himself walking on it. Hundreds and hundreds of references to water. Water was a favorite symbol, and as the Harper's Bible Dictionary puts it, water, strangely, is also a symbol of instability and of the fleeting quality of life. It would seem that the subjects of water and the truth are brought side by side in this story of Jesus' encounter with the Samaritan woman, and they're brought together quite deliberately. There is a certain fleetingness to water. That is, it is massively important and obvious to us all, yet it can so easily slip through our fingers, can't it? It can evaporate like so much smoke at a too short-lived fire. It can, as the proverbial phrase goes, slip easily off the oily duck's back, and it can also disappear into the deep, dark cracks of existence. Is this not also the nature of the truth? Would it not seem so easily apprehended if only we should allow ourselves to search it out, discover it, and study it, and yet, like a chameleon, the truth would seem to sort of slip through our fingers the way water does. Just ask any medical researcher striving for that answer for years. An astronomer looking further than anybody's ever looked. An oceanographer looking, I never realized the ocean is really deep. It's thousands and thousands of feet deep. It's incredibly deep. Ask your average minister or theologian. They know how difficult handling the truth is, or should. I'm often amused when I'm out and about in the world wearing my clerical collar. Now, strangely, it has become almost taboo among some clergy to be so dressed, as they feel it uncomfortably sets them apart or estranges them from people. I find the reverse is quite often true. Besides being associated with the church, it is something that reminds people that the church is present. You're a minister or a servant of the church, and you shouldn't be embarrassed or hide from it. This is your calling. In fact, often I find people will go way out of their way to address me as a presumably convenient agent of the church upon whom it is time to unload their deepest concerns about the church and even disgust at times. But also real unflinching support. What I find most often, however, is that you as a clergy person are frequently viewed as some kind of moral repository, where complaints about or questions concerning what is good or bad in life are to be delivered to or secured from. In this sense, you are always on duty. Could that be why many clergy aren't wearing their collars? My point here is not about the clergy's uniform, but rather about the expectation of the clergy being some sort of judge or authority, albeit legitimate or not, on what is good or bad. Sort of professional moralists, that is, not who we are or should be. The story of the woman and Jesus makes this clear, the woman from the Samaritan woman. Jesus did not enumerate how she had gone off track or was on track. He simply recounted what was the truth about her. Somehow her life had more to do with her thirst, not for some moralistic philosophy from Jesus, but from something deeper in the well of life. A spirit and a truth and a loving understanding that would quench her thirst in life like nothing else, but that eternal and heavenly water. After all, when you think about it, isn't love and truth as difficult to control and predict as water? Aren't they all very much alike? You don't want to take someone who loves you for granted any more than you'd want to take the water supply from your tap at home for granted, would you? Let them not be compared too closely. Think of how things would change if either one stops. You don't want to take the truth for granted because it is something that you really need to be aware of, otherwise it'll turn around and bite you. Nor, contrary to the sentiments of some, should we desire to totally monopolize or take control of these things, even if we could, which we can't. Nor with all of these things, it is more about not owning the stream, but being on it. We want to be aware of the stream of truth as it flows in from the news from all over the world and affects our lives every day. We benefit more than we know from the stream of love, though, emanating from souls all around us who do things for us in multitudes of ways. We not only want to partake of it, our lives depend on it. We need our spirits lifted above the oceans of worries in the world, the face of the deep struggles, sadnesses, and tragedies, both our own and those of others. We thirst for that eternal water, that spiritual stream of which Jesus speaks to the Samaritan woman. And we are all a part of this spiritual stream. When we reach out and help somebody, when we give people our time to strive to understand them, just as Jesus did at the well, I don't know about you, but in my encounters in the society around me, I find people are often beelining it for their various functions. There's little time for one another. That's one different thing. There should be one different thing at church. We have time for one another. In a way, every Christian is really wearing a clerical altar. It says, "Come to me." Even those of you that are heavy laden with all sorts of burdens, come to me and share with me, and you may be doing the same. And herein, we are open to sharing nothing less than that water which will, as Jesus put it, become a spring welling up to eternal life. Don't we all want to be on that stream? Amen. Our offering